So, continuing on with the progressives, we're going to be looking at social reforms. And again, the progressives are just trying to make life better for Americans. And we're going to be looking at social reform. So, it's really more people based than it is business based, like we were talking about yesterday. And the first thing that we're going to look at is muckrackers. So, muckrackers were reform minded journalists and authors who investigated and brought attention to social conditions and political corruption. So, really, these are journalists who are seeing that there's corruption happening, whether it's at the national government level, the local government level, a business, whatever it may be. They're investigating it, they're writing about it, and they are publishing for the world to see. I'd mentioned a couple weeks ago that I really feel like free speech has definitely come under attack. Journalists as well have definitely come under attack, especially during the last few years. You do need journalists. Journalists are the ones that they see corruption happening, they see a problem in society, they decide to write about it, and they decide to find a way to expose whatever problems or ills that they are seeing in society. And if you don't have journalists, you're not necessarily going to have people that are going to be able to investigate corruption or even publish it. And you have to keep in mind that really during the late 1800s and early 1900s, most journalism was done through newspapers. You didn't have radio, you didn't have television, so, CNN and Fox News and networks like that, they just didn't exist. It was really newspapers, and you had three newspaper editions of one coming out in the morning, one coming out in the afternoon, and then one coming out in the evening. So, journalists, in terms of just getting out information and spreading news, were incredibly important and frankly still are. Obviously, we have social media, but the only way that you even get, your memes or your TikToks about the news is from journalists themselves. So definitely needed in society. And if you look at the picture on the bottom, this is how you can think of muckrackers, as they're basically taking a rake, and they are, scraping up the crap. So there are three sort of muckrakers that we're going to talk here, and we'll talk about a more famous one in a few minutes. But the first one's going to be Jacob Riis, and he writes a book called How the Other Half Lives. I mentioned that people were moving from, these rural areas where they would live at home on a farm with their families, and they would start moving into the cities because they started working in the factories due to the Industrial Revolution. When these people start moving to the cities, they obviously start living in these tenement homes, and cities start building skyscrapers. So that's why you have buildings that are 20, 30, 40, 50 floors high with tons of apartments inside. And Jacob Riis really saw that a lot of the living conditions that were occurring in these tenement homes were quite awful. Oftentimes, because workers weren't paid well, they couldn't afford a lot. So you might have, say, a one bedroom studio apartment with six or seven people living in there, and they're cramped. The building wasn't taken care of. Today you have landlords that they have to take care of your building. So I rent a condo. If I were to have a pipe that bursts, my landlord is responsible for taking care of that, not me. If the air conditioner were to break tomorrow, my landlord is responsible for covering that for me. And that works if you rent an apartment as well. And what Jacob Riis sort of really discovered is that the landlords weren't taking care of the buildings. They weren't taking care of the plumbing issues. And because these people were so poor, it wasn't like they could afford to just go somewhere else. But they lived in really tight quarters. A lot of these buildings were very cramped, very smelly, very dirty. And so Jacob Riis wanted to show how the poor lived and what these tenement homes and city living was really like to hopefully bring attention to the poor. You have Lincoln Steffens, who writes The Shame of the Cities. He's really going to seek to expose public corruption, especially in major cities like New York, like Chicago. And when we're talking about, public corruption, we're looking at corruption in the city. So whether or not people are, finding a way to get a certain somebody elected or whatever it may be, Lincoln Steffens wanted to expose that. But he didn't just want to expose that. He also wanted people to be aware that the only way that corruption like this ends is if you're aware of it and if you do something about it. Like, if you know somebody's cheating and you never say anything to them, they're going to continue to do it. And that's really the same thing with this political corruption. If you know your local government's corrupt, if you know your national government's corrupt, and you don't do anything to try to stop it, guess what? The corruption is going to continue. And then you have Ida Tarbell. She writes the history of Standard Oil Company, and really she's going to be looking at how the Standard Oil Company had really created a monopoly. And again, a monopoly is when a company has complete control over the market. So I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to go back to that toilet paper example. If Angel Soft was the only toilet paper company around, and they decided to charge $20 for a single roll of toilet paper, they absolutely could. because, again, they're the only company that produces toilet paper, and so customers will have to pay whatever it is that they decide to charge. Now, Charmin Ultra, the Target brand, your local grocery store brand, the Costco brand, all of a sudden come out with toilet paper as well, and they charge $5 a roll. Angel Soft would have to lower their prices because, again, they're going to have to compete. So monopolies are good for businesses, not great for consumers. So we as consumers like competition. Really, Ida Tarbell had seen that there was a monopoly on the oil market. She writes this book, and because of it, the oil market's going to be forced to be broken up. So that way it's more beneficial to consumers like you and I. The most famous of the muckraker books and journalists that end up happening, though, is going to be none other than Upton Sinclair. And in 1906, Upton Sinclair is going to write this book called The Jungle. And really, in this book, he wanted to focus on the immigrant working class who was working in the meatpacking district of Chicago. And what Upton Sinclair noticed was that this immigrant working class, that they are being treated poorly compared to other workers. They weren't being paid as much. Again, they were in really awful conditions. And so when he wrote this book, he thought that people were just going to be utterly and completely horrified by how awful these people were being treated. But something else happened. When people read The Jungle, not only did Upton Sinclair write about the working class who were working in the meat packing district, he also wrote about the meat itself and what he noticed was happening in the meat packing district. So here are some of the things that he wrote about. He wrote about the fact that you had rats running around the meat locker. And if you know anything about rats, they carry a lot of deadly, gross diseases. That's how we got something like the plague to happen, is from those rats. He would write about how, there would be like a leaky pipe from the top that was basically coming down from the ceiling, leaking onto the meat, that if there was bad meat, they would just cut off the bad part, or, they would grind the bad parts in the meat together, can it and sell it and put all these preservatives in to mask the smell of it. So when The Jungle came out, nobody cared about the working class. They were like, oh my God, my food. My food is tainted. My food is gross. There's rats running around. It's dirty. It's disease. We have to do something about the food. So even though the intent of The Jungle was to point out the working class and everything that they were going through, nobody cared. They instead cared about their food and all the bad things that were happening. So what happens as a result? Well, for one, the Meat Inspection Act is going to be passed in 1906, and meat would have to be inspected and graded by the USDA. So if any of you have ever been to a grocery store and have picked up anything from the meat department, on those packages you'll normally see a USDA sticker. That means that the meat has, gone through some rigorous tests to say that it's good to sell, it's not bad, and basically that it's safe to eat. Something else that meat departments have to do is they have to sell meat by a certain time. So again, when you look at those packages, it'll be like a sell-by date. And if you see that it's marked at 50% down, basically it means you have to buy it right away and cook it right away because it's about to go bad, or you freeze it and then whenever you're ready to eat it, you would unfreeze it and again cook it right away. So that was the Meat Inspection Act. You're also going to have the Pure Food and Drug Act that's going to be created, and the goal was to ensure proper labeling of food and drugs, and of course to prevent tampering. That led to what we know today as the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. I'm sure that you've heard the FDA quite a bit in the news with the coronavirus. We keep hearing how a vaccine has to be FDA approved, right? That is their job, is to look at food and to look at drugs and to improve the methods that were used. So if you look at the bottom left right there, it talks about cocaine. So one of the sort of famous stories that came out that, the FDA regulates is back in the day, Coca-Cola actually used to have traces of cocaine in their soda. How much? Nobody really knows. But it wasn't until, I would say, the 1930s that cocaine got completely erased from Coca-Cola's formula. So obviously something like that would not happen today because of the FDA. They're not just responsible for food, they're also responsible for drugs as well. So back in the 1980s, Tylenol had a really major incident. I believe it was in the Chicago area where people were taking Tylenol and they ended up dying because the Tylenol pills were tampered with cyanide, which if you know anything about cyanide, it's a very dangerous poison. And so they never caught the guy who actually did it. Tylenol, who's owned by Johnson & Johnson, had to pull every single Tylenol bottle off the shelf in the entire United States of America. And because of that, all of our pills that are over the counter are in that gel capsule form. You'll also notice that when you open the bottle, it has a little seal on it that says, if this has been tampered with, do not take it. The reason that happened is because of that Tylenol incident in the 1980s, and that, of course, was the FDA's doing. So the Food and Drug Administration, right, they are responsible for making sure that the food that we eat and the drugs that we take are going to be safe. And these are some of the pictures from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. But you can just sort of see, especially in the top pictures on the left and the right, people aren't wearing gloves, and it just wasn't very good. You're also going to have a little bit sort of a social gospel movement that's going to take place. And the social gospel was really a movement that strove to improve conditions in cities according to the biblical ideas of charity and justice. You can really kind of compare it to the First Great Awakening or even the Second Great Awakening. This idea that we should be church going people who do good things, because that's what God wants us to be. That was really kind of what the social gospel was. And what comes out of it is none other than the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. Dwight L. Moody was the American organizer, but the YMCA was initially started in Great Britain. And the YMCA was initially created in a response to the Industrial Revolution. They noticed that, people weren't really at home anymore. Again, they're moving to the cities. They're living in these tenement style homes. They're working these 16-hour days. They're no longer going to church. And they just sort of felt like this good Christian morals were disappearing from society. So when the YMCA was created, the idea was that it was going to help industrial workers as well as the urban poor by organizing Bible studies, prayer meetings, citizen training, as well as fitness activities. So again, it was just about trying to make the world a better place. A couple of interesting things about the YMCA. It was at the YMCA that both basketball and volleyball were created and invented. So if you are a basketball or volleyball fan, you have the YMCA to thank for it. I also think the YMCA has really become pretty famous because of the song, and I can't think of the group right now, but I'm sure if you've ever been to a wedding before, right, you do the YMCA song and dance, and the YMCA actually sued the Village People. That was their name. So the YMCA actually sued the Village People who made the song YMCA because they didn't really care for the costumes and their take on the song, but the lawsuit ended up getting dropped. But I would say the YMCA really lives on because of the Village People and the YMCA song. If you've never been to a wedding, I promise you at some point you will do the YMCA. And the last person that we're going to look at is Jane Addams and settlement houses. So Jane Addams really became famous in 1889 when she began the Hull House. And really what the point of the Hull House was kind of similar to what the YMCA was. It was a settlement home where middle-class residents lived with and kind of helped poor residents. They would provide them with medical care, English classes, hot lunches, things like that. You can almost kind of think of it like a halfway house, right? Like if someone's a recovering drug addict, or if you have like women who are leaving abusive marriages, they typically go and live in like a home or a center. That's essentially what the settlement homes were. And these were really started by Jane Addams. Again, she saw a problem in society, that these poor people weren't living great lives, or they didn't have enough money to really take care of themselves. And so she wanted to start a home where they can go and, again, learn English, get the food and medical care that they needed in order to better their lives. The Hull House really expanded, even years after it started in 1889. Eventually, it also became a place where summer camps would take place. And today, the Hull House still exists in Chicago, and it is now a museum. So if you ever go to Chicago, it would be a great opportunity to see the work that Jane Addams did, as well as to get to see the Hull House in general.